The security guard at Harrods was escorting my sister out while she screamed about discrimination, and I couldn't help the smile tugging at my lips as I selected another La Mer lip treatment from the pristine display. In my previous life, I would have been mortified. In this one, I knew exactly how this scene would end, and it was glorious. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with Chapstick. It always started with something small, something I was supposed to share because family shares everything. That's what my mother would say every time Claire helped herself to my things, my clothes, my makeup, my jewelry, my opportunities. Everything was community property in our house, except it only ever went one way. Claire never shared. Claire only took. In my first life, I died at 23 in a car accident. Claire had been driving. My car, naturally, because hers was in the shop, even though she'd totaled it drag racing with her boyfriend. We were on our way to a job interview that I had secured through months of networking. Claire had begged to come along, said she wanted to support me. I was stupid enough to believe her. She ran a red light while texting. I saw the truck coming. I had just enough time to realize that she was going to kill us both over an Instagram message, and then everything went white. When I opened my eyes again, I was 16, standing in my childhood bedroom, staring at a stick of drugstore chapstick in my hand. The same chapstick Claire had just used without asking, leaving the bullet twisted up, the top off, probably contaminated with whatever she'd eaten for lunch. My hand was shaking. I remembered everything. 7 years of life, 7 years of being the family doormat, 7 years of watching Claire get everything while I got the scraps. I remembered my college fund being borrowed for Claire's spring break trip to Cancun. I remembered my mother giving Claire my prom dress because it looked better on her. I remembered my father laughing when I asked if he'd come to my college graduation, saying he had to take Claire to look at apartments in the city. I remembered the job interview I never got to attend because Claire killed me on the way there. The position I'd worked so hard for, the career I'd dreamed of, gone. And I remembered finding out in the days before the accident that Claire had already applied for the same position using my portfolio, my references, my work. She'd planned to go to that interview instead of me all along. But most of all, I remembered dying. I remembered the impact, the pain, the fear, and the overwhelming regret that I had wasted my entire life letting people walk all over me. Not this time. I looked at that chapstick and I made a decision. If I had to live these 7 years again, I was going to do it differently. I was going to take everything that was supposed to be mine, and I was going to make sure Claire and my parents learned what it felt like to have nothing. But I had to be smart about it. I was 16 with no money, no independence, and living under my parents' roof. I couldn't just rebel. I'd tried that in my previous life, and all it got me was screaming matches and being called ungrateful. No, I needed to play the long game. I needed to make strategic moves that would slowly shift the power in my favor while they never saw it coming. The first thing I did was protect my resources. I started small, so small they wouldn't notice. I replaced my drugstore chapstick with a slightly nicer one and kept it in my pocket at all times. When Claire asked to borrow it, I said I'd lost it. She complained to my mother, of course. "Why are you being difficult?" My mother sighed, not even looking up from her phone. "Just share with your sister." "I don't have it anymore, Mom." I told her. Claire narrowed her eyes at me. She knew I was lying, but she couldn't prove it. That was the key. I couldn't openly defy them, but I could make things inconvenient, make sharing harder, make them work for what they wanted to take. Over the next few months, I implemented what I called the inconvenience strategy. Everything I owned either stayed on my person, was locked in a box I'd bought with babysitting money, or was hidden in places Claire would never think to look. When she complained that I wasn't sharing, I acted confused and apologetic. "Oh, I thought it was in my drawer. Someone must have moved it." Or, "That's weird. I could have sworn I left it in the bathroom." My parents were annoyed, but they couldn't exactly punish me for being disorganized. Claire was furious but couldn't articulate why without admitting how much of my stuff she routinely took without asking. But that was just defense. I needed offense. I remembered that Claire had gotten into fashion design school in my previous life. Or rather, she'd gotten in using my portfolio. I had spent my junior year of high school creating a series of sketches and fabric samples for a design competition, working every evening until my hands cramped. Claire had watched me work with a calculating look I hadn't understood at the time. 2 weeks before the competition deadline, my entire portfolio disappeared. My parents helped Claire search for it, and my mother had said maybe it was a sign I should focus on something more practical anyway. I found out years later, after Claire was established in the fashion world, that she'd submitted my work under her name. The portfolio that got her into Parsons, the scholarship that paid her way, the internship at Marc Jacobs, all of it built on my stolen designs. This time, I didn't create a portfolio. Instead, I took every design class I could, absorbed every bit of knowledge, and kept detailed notes on everything I learned. I sketched constantly, but I shared nothing, showed nothing. And when my parents asked about my schoolwork, I said design class was fine, nothing special. Meanwhile, Claire floundered. She'd been planning to coast on my work just like before, but there was nothing to steal. She started asking me for help, saying we should collaborate. I politely declined, citing too much homework in my other classes. "You're being selfish," my mother said when Claire complained. "Claire wants to bond with you over a shared interest, and you're shutting her out." "I'm just not very good at design," I said, playing stupid. "Claire is so much more talented than me. I wouldn't want to hold her back." It was a careful balance, agreeing with their assessment of me as the lesser daughter while quietly building my own foundation. Let them underestimate me. Let them think I was still the same pushover who cried when they were mean and apologized for existing. They had no idea I was playing a completely different game. The summer before senior year, I got a job at a local boutique. My parents weren't thrilled. They thought I should be available to help Claire with her college applications. But I insisted I needed to save for a car. What I actually needed was money they couldn't touch and a connection to the fashion retail world. The boutique owner, Margaret, was a woman in her 60s who'd worked in fashion her entire life. She'd owned the boutique for 30 years, and she knew everyone in the industry. I absorbed everything she taught me about business, about networking, about how the fashion world really worked beyond the design itself. I also started saving every penny. Not in a bank account my parents knew about. I'd learned that lesson when they'd drained my college fund in my previous life. I opened an account at a different bank across town, listing Margaret's boutique as my address. Every paycheck went straight to that account. I told my parents the job barely paid anything, that I was only doing it for experience. By the time senior year started, I had $3,000 saved. Claire had a portfolio full of mediocre work she'd struggled to produce on her own, and increasing panic about college applications. "You should help your sister," my father said one evening at dinner. "She's applying to some very competitive schools. You could give her some of your sketches to include in her portfolio." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. In my previous life, I'd been confused by this request because I'd already lost my portfolio. This time, I knew exactly what they were planning. "I don't have any sketches worth including," I said. "My design work isn't good enough for schools like Parsons." "Don't be modest," my mother said, but her tone suggested she didn't actually believe I was being modest. She thought I was being difficult. "Claire says you're always drawing. Let her look through your sketchbook." "I threw most of them away," I lied. "They were just doodles." The argument that followed was predictable. My parents accused me of sabotaging my sister out of jealousy. Claire cried and said she just wanted us to be close. I held firm, apologizing profusely for not having anything worth sharing, watching their frustration mount. Later that night, Claire broke into the lockbox under my bed. I'd expected this. It was exactly what she'd done in my previous life. The box was empty except for a note. "Looking for something?" The next morning, Claire was in a rage, but she couldn't admit what she'd done without confessing to breaking into my things. She spent the rest of senior year creating a portfolio that was good enough to get her into a decent state school, but nowhere near the level of Parsons or FIT. I, meanwhile, had been quietly building something else entirely. Using Margaret's connections, I'd started doing freelance design work under a pseudonym. Small jobs, nothing spectacular, but enough to build a real portfolio and get actual industry experience. I designed a few pieces for local boutiques, helped with some small fashion show productions, learned the business from the ground up. All of this was invisible to my parents and Claire, who assumed I spent my free time working retail. I also studied. Not just design, but business, marketing, and most importantly, trademark and copyright law. I documented everything I created, registered my designs, protected my intellectual property. When you've been plagiarized once, you make sure it never happens again. By graduation, I had a portfolio that was genuinely mine, $7,000 in savings, and a letter of acceptance from FIT with a partial scholarship. I also had a plan for how to pay for the rest, something I'd been working on since the day I'd been reborn. I waited until dinner the night after Claire's graduation party to make my announcement. My parents had spent $15,000 on the party, money that in my previous life had been borrowed from my college fund. This time, there was no college fund to borrow from. I'd never deposited the savings bonds my grandmother had given me over the years. Instead, I'd cashed them quietly and added them to my secret account. I got into FIT, I said casually, between bites of the catered food from Claire's party. My mother looked up, surprised. You applied to fashion school? I thought you were going to community college. I never said that, you assumed. Well, you can't go, my father said immediately. We don't have that kind of money. I know, I said calmly. I'm paying for it myself. I have scholarships and savings. The silence that followed was deafening. What savings? My mother asked sharply. You said that job barely paid anything. I said it didn't pay much. I've been saving for 3 years. Claire's face had gone pale. She'd gotten into a decent school, but nothing compared to FIT. And now her little sister, the one who was supposed to be less talented, less important, less everything, was going to one of the top fashion schools in the country. You should give that money to Claire, my mother said, recovering quickly. She could use it for her housing deposit. I smiled, the same sweet smile I'd perfected over 16 years of being the family punching bag. I can't. It's in a restricted education account. I can only spend it on my own tuition and expenses. This was a lie, but they'd never bother to verify it. The rest of the summer was tense. My parents made various attempts to guilt me into giving Claire money, letting her come with me to New York, helping her transfer to a better school. I politely declined everything, always with an apologetic smile and an excuse they couldn't quite argue with. When I moved to New York in August, I felt lighter than I had in 2 lifetimes. Fit was everything I'd dreamed of. I devoured my classes, networked relentlessly, and took on every internship opportunity I could find. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my previous life because this time, I knew exactly how valuable these years were. But more than that, I was strategic. I remembered which professors became important industry figures. I remembered which fashion houses were about to have breakthroughs. I remembered stock tips, real estate booms, technological innovations. I couldn't act on all of this knowledge. I was still a broke college student, but I could position myself to take advantage of opportunities when they came. I also remembered the people who'd helped me in my previous life and made sure to cultivate those relationships earlier and more intentionally. Margaret's boutique introduced me to a supplier who introduced me to a manufacturer who introduced me to an investor. Each connection was a thread, and I was weaving them into a safety net that would eventually become my empire. Claire, meanwhile, was struggling at state school. She called me every few weeks asking for help with her design projects, for money, for connections in New York. I was always sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. I'm barely keeping my head above water myself, I'd say. This city is so expensive and the competition is intense. It wasn't entirely a lie, but I was doing better than I let on. I'd started a small side business designing custom pieces for boutiques under my registered business name, and I was making enough to not just cover my expenses, but to save. Every semester, my safety net grew stronger. The real test came in my junior year when I landed an internship at a major fashion house, the same internship Claire had stolen in my previous life. She'd found out about it through me, applied using my recommendation letters, and gotten the position because she'd used my designs to impress them. This time, I told no one I was applying until after I'd gotten the position. When Claire found out through social media because I'd posted a celebratory photo, she called me immediately. Why didn't you tell me you were applying there? She demanded. I would have applied too. We could have been in New York together. The deadline passed. Months ago, I said apologetically. I didn't think you'd be interested in moving to New York. Of course I'm interested. Can you get me an interview? Talk to your supervisor? I'm just an intern, Claire. I don't have that kind of influence. She hung up angry, and my mother called an hour later to tell me I was being selfish and cruel to my sister. I let her vent, agreed that I probably could have handled it better, and then went back to my work. That internship changed everything. I proved myself invaluable, took on extra projects, made connections with designers and executives, and by the end of the summer, I had a job offer waiting for me after graduation. Not just any job, a junior designer position with benefits, a real salary, and a path to advancement. But I wanted more. In my previous life, I'd been so grateful for any opportunity that I'd accepted the first offer without negotiating. I'd been too afraid of seeming greedy or ungrateful. This time, I knew my worth, and I knew what the market would bear. I negotiated. I asked for more money, better benefits, a clearer path to senior designer status. They respected me for it and met most of my requests. When I graduated and started that job, I was making more than my father made after 25 years at his company. Claire was still in school, struggling with her coursework, and increasingly bitter. My parents had to take out loans to keep her enrolled, and the financial stress was making them short-tempered. They'd call me asking for money. Just a loan, just until we get back on our feet. And I'd explain that New York was expensive, and I was still paying off my student loans. I wasn't. I'd paid them off in 6 months, and I really couldn't afford to help. After everything we've done for you, my mother said coldly, we raised you, fed you, clothed you, and now you can't help your family when we need it? I wanted to laugh. They'd done the bare minimum while lavishing Claire with everything, and now they expected gratitude? I'm sorry, Mom. I'm doing my best. The years that followed were a masterclass in strategic planning. I climbed the ranks at the fashion house, made smart investments with my savings, and built a reputation in the industry. I also started quietly developing my own line. Nothing public yet, just designs and business plans and manufacturing connections. I remembered that sustainable fashion was going to explode in popularity, so I focused on eco-friendly materials and ethical production. I remembered which social media platforms would become important for fashion marketing. I remembered that direct-to-consumer models would disrupt traditional retail. By the time I was 25, 2 years past my death date in the previous life, I launched my own brand. It was small at first, just an online shop with a few signature pieces, but it was mine. Every stitch was protected by copyright, every design registered, every business decision carefully calculated. The brand took off faster than I dared hope. My sustainable luxury pieces hit the market at exactly the right moment, and my strategic social media presence meant I built a following quickly. Within 6 months, I was featured in Vogue. Within a year, I had a flagship store in Soho. My parents saw the Vogue article. My mother called, her voice dripping with fake pride. We always knew you had talent, sweetheart. Your father and I are so proud. Thank you, I said neutrally. Claire's graduating this spring, you know. She could really use a job. Maybe you could bring her on as a designer? There it was, the real reason for the call. I'm not hiring right now, I lied. I was actively hiring, but I'd rather burn my studio to the ground than give Claire a foothold in my company. But I'll keep her in mind if anything opens up. Claire did graduate, barely, with a mediocre portfolio and no job prospects. She moved back home with my parents and started applying to fashion houses in the city using my name as a reference without asking. I found out when a colleague mentioned that someone claiming to be my sister had applied to their company and listed me as a reference. I called every major fashion house in New York and quietly let them know that while I had a sister named Claire, I could not in good conscience recommend her work or work ethic. It was the professional equivalent of blackballing her, and I felt no guilt whatsoever. When Claire figured out that doors were closing before she even got to knock on them, she blamed me. She called screaming about how I was sabotaging her, how I was jealous, how I'd always been jealous. I haven't done anything, I said calmly. The fashion industry is just very competitive. You told them not to hire me. I was honest when people asked for my professional opinion. That's not sabotage. That's honesty. She threatened to sue me for slander. I reminded her that truth is an absolute defense against slander and suggested she might want to reconsider making legal threats. She hung up. My parents tried to intervene, but I was untouchable now. I was successful, independent, and completely free of their influence. They couldn't guilt me, couldn't manipulate me, couldn't take anything from me because I'd built everything myself and I'd protected it. Claire eventually found work at a fast fashion company, the kind that churned out cheap clothes in sweatshops overseas. She hated it, but couldn't find anything better. She tried to launch her own brand a few times, but nothing stuck. Turns out, when you don't have someone else's talent to steal, success is a lot harder to come by. Meanwhile, my brand grew. I opened stores in LA, Miami, and London. I dressed celebrities for the Met Gala. I won awards for sustainable fashion innovation. I bought a penthouse in Manhattan with a view of Central Park, the same view I'd dreamed of from the cramped apartment I'd shared with 3 roommates in my previous life, and I started using luxury beauty products exclusively. La Mer moisturizer, Sisley Paris lip balm, Tom Ford lip treatments that cost more than Claire's monthly rent. I'd post photos on Instagram sometimes, casually showing my latest purchases, knowing Claire followed my account obsessively. She couldn't help herself. She'd always been obsessed with having what I had, being what I was. In our childhood, it had manifested as stealing my things. Now, with the power dynamic reversed, it manifested as desperate attempts to copy my lifestyle. She'd buy knockoff versions of my clothes. She'd try to shop at the stores I frequented, even though she couldn't afford anything. She'd post photos trying to recreate my aesthetic, and her followers, a fraction of mine, would leave comments pointing out how she was copying me. It was pathetic, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. This was the same person who'd stolen my entire future in another life. She'd made my existence a misery for 18 years, and then she'd literally killed me through carelessness and selfishness. Whatever discomfort she felt now was a fraction of what she'd put me through. The real breaking point came 3 years ago when I was 28. I was in London for Fashion Week, staying at Claridge's, and I posted a photo of my hotel room, casually luxurious as one does on Instagram. Claire commented, "Must be nice to forget where you came from." I replied, "I haven't forgotten. I've simply moved past it." She showed up in London. I have no idea how she afforded the ticket, probably credit card debt she'd never pay off. She found out where I was staying and appeared in the hotel lobby, demanding to see me. The hotel staff called my room to ask if I was expecting a guest named Claire. I told them no, and to please escort her out if she caused any trouble. I watched from my window as she argued with the doorman, her voice rising, her gestures wild and desperate. She called me screaming, "How dare you have me kicked out? I'm your sister." "You're someone who's made my life difficult at every opportunity," I said calmly. "I'm in London for work, not a family reunion. If you want to see me, you can make an appointment through my assistant like everyone else." "I don't need an appointment to see my own sister." "You do if you want access to my private time. I'm hanging up now." She tried to ambush me at my Fashion Week show 2 days later. Security stopped her at the door. Her name wasn't on the list, and she didn't have the kind of credentials that would get her in. I watched from backstage as she argued with the security guard, her face red, her voice carrying across the venue. My publicist asked if I knew her. "Unfortunately," I said. "Please make sure she doesn't get anywhere near me or my show." The show was a massive success. I was at the top of my game, surrounded by people who respected me, wearing a custom piece from my own collection that probably cost more than my parents' mortgage. And Claire was outside, locked out of my world entirely. That should have been enough. That should have been the end of it. But Claire couldn't let it go. She'd built her entire identity around being better than me, and now that I was objectively more successful, she couldn't handle it. She started a blog about the dark side of the fashion industry, positioning herself as a whistleblower, exposing the truth about successful designers. She didn't name me directly, probably her lawyer told her that would be actionable, but she made it clear who she was talking about. She claimed I'd stolen designs from her, that I'd built my career on her work, that everything I had rightfully belonged to her. It was projection so blatant, it would have been funny if it weren't so malicious. The blog got some attention, mostly from people who loved takedown pieces about successful women. My team advised me to ignore it, said responding would only give her more attention. But I'd been playing the long game for over a decade, and I had evidence even Claire didn't know existed. I still had my original sketchbooks from high school, every page dated and photographed, stored in a safe deposit box. I had copyright registrations for every design I'd ever created. I had testimony from Margaret, my boutique mentor, about the work I'd done as a teenager. I had emails, receipts, photographs, and witnesses documenting my creative process for every single piece in my collection. I had my lawyers send her a cease and desist letter outlining exactly how much documentation I had and suggesting that if she wanted to make legal claims about theft, we could certainly pursue that in court. The letter made it clear that we had more than enough evidence to not only defend against her claims, but to file a countersuit for defamation. The blog came down within 24 hours. Claire called me crying, begging me not to sue her. "I'm not going to sue you," I said, "but if you ever make public accusations about me again, if you ever try to claim credit for my work, if you ever attempt to sabotage my career or reputation, I will destroy you legally and professionally. Do you understand?" She understood. My parents called to tell me I was being cruel and vindictive. I reminded them that Claire had made public accusations of theft against me, and I'd simply defended myself with the truth. If they thought that was cruel, perhaps they should have raised Claire to understand that actions have consequences. "After everything we did for you," my father said again, that same tired refrain. "You did the bare minimum for me while giving Claire everything," I replied, calm and factual. "You paid for her parties and trips and lifestyle while I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. You're not victims here. You're just finally experiencing what it's like when the scapegoat stops accepting that role." I hung up before he could respond and blocked their numbers. I was done pretending we were a normal family. I was done with the fiction that they'd been good parents or that I owed them anything. Which brings me to 6 months ago and the incident at Harrods that I mentioned at the beginning. I was in London again for business and decided to stop at Harrods for some shopping. I'd recently become obsessed with their luxury beauty hall, the kind of place where lip balm costs £50 and comes in a crystal case. It was absurd and excessive and exactly the kind of thing that would have been impossible in my previous life. I was at the La Mer counter testing their new lip treatment when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me, I'd like to try that." I turned, and there was Claire. She looked tired, her clothes were off the rack trying to look expensive, and her hair needed a professional treatment. She was staring at the La Mer product in my hand with an expression I knew well, want mixed with resentment. "Claire," I said neutrally, "what are you doing in London?" "I could ask you the same thing," she snapped, then seemed to remember where we were and forced a smile. "I'm here for a design conference." This was a lie. I knew everyone at every major design conference in London, and Claire wasn't registered for any of them. She'd probably seen my Instagram stories and followed me here just like she had 3 years ago. "How nice," I said, turning back to the sales associate. "I'll take 3 of these, please." "3?" Claire's voice was sharp. "Why do you need 3 lip treatments?" "One for my purse, one for my office, one for home," I said, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world, which, for me, it was. "Would you like to try the tester?" The sales associate handed Claire the tester, and I watched as she looked at the price tag. £55, about $75, for lip balm. I could see the war on her face. She wanted it, wanted to prove she could have the same luxury items I had. But she couldn't afford it. In her world, where every penny counted, $75 for lip balm was absurd. "It's very nice," she said, putting it down, "but I'm actually looking for something else." She wandered through the beauty hall, picking up items and putting them down when she saw the prices. I continued shopping, adding things to my basket, with the ease of someone for whom money was no longer a concern. Silk face masks, rare perfumes, a caviar-infused eye cream that cost £200, Claire watched everything I bought with barely concealed fury. This was what she'd always wanted, the luxury, the carelessness with money, the ability to buy anything without checking the price. And I had it all while she struggled. The sales associate was ringing up my purchases when Claire did something that was both predictable and incredibly stupid. She tried to slip one of the La Mer lip treatments into her purse. I saw it happen. So did the sales associate, whose eyes widened, and so did the security camera overhead. "Excuse me, miss," the sales associate said, her voice professional but firm. "I need to check your bag." Claire's face went white. "What? Why?" "I saw you put something in your bag that hasn't been paid for, Del." "I didn't." You're mistaken. This is discrimination. A security guard appeared, drawn by the commotion. Ma'am, we need to check your bag. Claire tried to run. This was possibly the stupidest thing she could have done because attempting to flee made her look even more guilty. The security guard caught her at the exit, and when they searched her bag, they found not just the La Mer lip treatment, but also a Sisley face oil she'd stolen from another counter. She was arrested for shoplifting, right there in Harrods, in front of 100 shoppers with their phones out, recording everything. I completed my purchase, thanked the sales associate, and walked past Claire as the police were explaining her rights. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "Please," she said. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding, please." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I thought about everything she'd put me through. The stolen chapstick when we were teenagers. So minor it seemed ridiculous to still remember it, but it had been part of a pattern. The stolen designs, the stolen opportunities, the stolen life, and in another timeline, the stolen future that had ended with my death. "I'm sorry," I said to the police officers. "I don't know this woman." I walked out of Harrods with my bags full of luxury beauty products, and I didn't look back. The story made the tabloids, of course. Unknown woman arrested for shoplifting luxury goods at Harrods. The photos weren't flattering. Claire looked desperate and deranged, her makeup smeared from crying, her cheap clothes wrinkled from the struggle. A few fashion bloggers who followed both of us put the pieces together, recognized her as my sister from old photos, realized we'd been in Harrods at the same time. Some people speculated that I'd somehow set her up, but most people saw it for what it was, a desperate woman making a stupid decision. Claire was charged, convicted, and sentenced to community service plus a fine she couldn't afford. My parents had to take out another loan to pay it, and according to mutual acquaintances, they were considering bankruptcy, but that wasn't even the most satisfying part. The most satisfying part came 2 weeks later when Claire posted a long apology on social media. Not to me, she'd never apologized to me, but a general apology about her struggles and mistakes. She talked about the pressure of trying to succeed in a difficult industry, about feeling inadequate compared to more successful designers, about making a terrible choice in a moment of weakness. The comments were not sympathetic. People pointed out that plenty of people struggle without stealing. They noted that she'd built a platform by criticizing other designers while apparently having no success of her own. They questioned why she thought she deserved luxury goods she couldn't afford instead of, working harder and earning them. A few people defended her, said society was too materialistic, said we shouldn't judge people for one mistake. But the court of public opinion had largely ruled against her, and in the fashion industry, reputation is everything. Claire became unemployable. The fast fashion company fired her. Other companies rejected her applications. She'd become known as that designer who got arrested at Harrods, and nobody wanted that association. My parents called me, I'd unblocked them temporarily, morbid curiosity getting the better of me, and begged me to help Claire, to give her a job, to use my influence to get her hired somewhere, to do something. "She's your sister," my mother said, her voice breaking. "She made a mistake, but she's still your sister." "She stopped being my sister a long time ago," I said. "Around the time she decided I existed to make her life easier. I'm not responsible for her choices or their consequences." "Please," my father said, we're drowning in debt. Claire can't find work. If you could just help us financially until we get back on our feet." "No. You have so much. How can you be as selfish?" "I have what I earned," I said. "What I built with my own hands, my own talent, my own work. You three spent my entire childhood teaching me that I wasn't entitled to anything, that I had to earn every scrap of respect and affection. Well, I learned that lesson. And now I'm teaching it to you. You're not entitled to my money, my influence, or my help. If you want those things, earn them." I hung up and blocked their numbers again, this time permanently. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm in my office overlooking Central Park, reviewing designs for my next collection. My brand is more successful than ever. We've expanded into accessories and footwear. I've been approached about a possible collaboration with a major luxury house. I'm financially secure for the rest of my life, and I wake up every morning grateful for the second chance I was given. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Claire moved back in with my parents. She's working at a mall retail store trying to rebuild some kind of life. My parents are still in debt. My mother apparently complains to anyone who will listen about her ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family. Let her complain. Let Claire struggle. Let my father understand what it feels like when the child he dismissed turns out to be worth more than he ever imagined, and that worth is completely out of his reach. I didn't get my revenge by destroying them, although I could have. I got my revenge by succeeding beyond their wildest dreams while they floundered in mediocrity. I got my revenge by being everything they said I couldn't be, by building an empire from nothing, by proving that talent and hard work beat entitlement and theft every single time. And I got my revenge by taking the smallest slight they ever dealt me, Claire using my chapstick, and turning it into a symbol of everything that was wrong with how they treated me. Every time I buy a $75 lip treatment, I think about that drugstore chapstick with the cap off, contaminated and disrespected. I think about teenage me, who thought it was normal to have her boundaries violated constantly, who apologized for wanting to keep anything for herself. That girl is gone. She died in a car accident in another life, and she was reborn into someone who knows her worth, protects her resources, and never, ever shares her lip balm. I pull out my current lip treatment, La Mer, of course, the one that costs 55 pounds at Harrods, and apply it slowly, enjoying the smooth glide, the subtle luxury of it. My lips are perfectly conditioned, never chapped, always camera ready. Claire's probably using whatever cheap chapstick she can shoplift from CVS, if she's stupid enough to try shoplifting again after her arrest. The thought makes me smile. My assistant buzzes in. Your 3 o'clock is here. Send them in. It's a meeting with a potential investor for my expansion into Asia. The stakes are high, millions of dollars, access to new markets, the next phase of my empire's growth. I'm nervous, but confident. I've prepared for this meeting the same way I've prepared for everything else in this second life. Meticulously, strategically, with no stone unturned. The meeting goes well, better than well. By the time the investor leaves, we've shaken hands on a deal that will double my company's valuation and open stores in Tokyo, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. I pour myself a glass of wine, a vintage that costs more than my parents' monthly mortgage, and stand at my window looking out at Central Park. The apartment I'm buying next month is on the other side of the park, even more expensive than this one, with even better views. I think about parallel universes, about the life where I died at 23, where Claire went on to build a career on my stolen work, where my parents never understood how badly they'd failed me. I think about that version of me, dead in a car crash, her potential unrealized, her dreams stolen. This life is for her, this success, this revenge, this absolute and total victory. It's for the girl who never got a chance to shine. My phone buzzes. It's a text from an unknown number, but I recognize the area code. It's from my parents' town. I know you hate us, the message reads. I know you have every right to, but I need to tell you something. When Claire was going through her things after the eviction, she found your old high school portfolio, the one that went missing senior year. She'd hidden it in a storage unit all this time. I'm looking at your designs from when you kid. We're 16 and they're incredible. Better than anything Claire ever made. I think I always knew that, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry we treated you the way we did. You deserved better. The message is from my mother. I stare at it for a long time, watching the cursor blink as I try to decide how to respond. Finally, I type, "Yes, I did deserve better. Thank you for acknowledging that." I hit send, then block the number. Her apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the years of favoritism and abuse. It doesn't bring back the life they made miserable. But it does confirm something I've always known. I was always talented. I was always worth something. They just refused to see it because it was easier to have one daughter who was the star and one who was the servant. Well, now they can see what they missed. They can see me in magazines, on red carpets, in the society pages. They can watch from whatever cheap apartment they end up in after bankruptcy, and they can know that the daughter they dismissed is everything they said she couldn't be. And I can live my life surrounded by luxury, success, and most importantly, self-respect. I can protect my resources, set my boundaries, and never apologize for taking up space. I finish my wine and pull out my lip treatment one more time. I apply it carefully, ceremonially, the way someone might raise a glass in a toast. This is for every time Claire took my things. This is for every time my parents chose her over me. This is for every opportunity they stole, every dream they crushed, every time they made me feel small. I am not small anymore. I am towering, magnificent, untouchable, and my lips are perfectly, luxuriously moisturized.